set and intent upon doing one thing and one thing only, and that is invading and intruding upon our land and our environment with mass burn facilities.
I have to admit that until I came to this hearing today, until I saw that this bill was actually scheduled, I had believed that the hucksters had won. You see, if we, and I think we all can agree that we cannot dump our garbage in the ocean because then we will swim in it. And I believe that we all agree that we cannot bury it because then we ultimately drink it. So we have been told by the hucksters, burn it and give our kids cancer. And I agree with you that ultimately that's what we're going to be doing. But you know, it'll take a long time for that to happen. And it will happen on someone else's watch. Now, that's too often what goes on here in Trenton or locally in counties or somewhere else. We take our problem and we push it off into someone else's regime.
The trash program in this state is clearly heading for failure. Warren County did what the state told them to do. They built an incinerator and they're recycling, in keeping with the law, 25% of the trash. The result is that the incinerator can't get enough BTUs and is therefore losing money. And they aren't doing all the recycling they can do anyway. And this is an example that I'll get back to that indicates that this state, and I'll be impartial, New York State as well, has failed to develop a rational program for dealing with the trash crisis. They simply haven't done it. They haven't even tried to do it.
It seems to me that there's a neck-and-neck race going on right now between Morris County and Warren, between the freeholders, to see which one can get to bankruptcy first. You know, it's like inverse monopoly. You know, you go around the board backwards, giving up money as you go along. At first, the Morris County freeholders had a slight edge because they started out with chambers, you know, and they started giving away money hand over fist. But now with the Warren County incinerator opening and the $98 a ton going up to $135 in points north, I see that Warren County has pulled out ahead and has maybe a neck lead on the Morris County freehold. But they're making, I have to give them credit, they haven't given up, they've fallen behind, but they are coming back strong with their own bankruptcy plan, namely the mass burn incinerator for Morris County.
I must challenge the assumption that this bill, that resource recovery facilities pose a threat to public health and the environment, and that in fact resource recovery technology is unproven and is of questionable value. Quite the contrary, the department remains convinced that this technology is environmentally sound, environmentally safe, and can be regulated in a manner that is fully consistent with similar industrial facilities. Far from believing that this technology is unproven, it is proven to be an effective means of solid waste disposal within the United States and many other parts of the world.
I would dare say that if the DEP got into recycling 10 years ago, when they started talking about a crisis, this problem would have been solved by now. We would have identified the products that couldn't have been recycled. We would have identified the members of industry who were willing for $1 to find a way to recycle them, and we would have found many of the solutions to the problems that we now have found, but we would have found them so much sooner.
What we're concerned about is the lead, the cadmium that comes out of that plant. What happens if it settles over here in our area with our children? What happens? Who do we go to find these things out?
So in the early 1970s, when NASA was starting to lay off many of its engineers and scientists, there was the Association of Resource Recovery, something like that. And was started, and predominantly people there at that point had an orientation towards burning technologies. And the Environmental Protection Agency, over a 10-year period, put about $100 million. They, with the U.S. Department of Energy, combined, their investment was around $200 million over a 10-year period, including the matching money that they got. And there was a major investment in research at that time. The same time period, they put $1 million into composting and recycling and waste reduction technologies. And it's real interesting because today, it's almost 20 years later, composting and recycling are probably doing 10% of the waste stream, and waste energy is only doing 1%.
What happened, typically in New Jersey and in New York City, was that the crisis arose, the landfills had to be replaced, and suddenly we were told that there is a way to take care of it, which is usually called waste-to-energy plant, a resource recovery plant. What it is, of course, is an incinerator. We'll call it an incinerator. And suddenly, there was this new industry building incinerators that seemed to have enormous clout because one after another, states and cities adopted this as the approach. And I'm sure some of you have been wondering, where does this thing come from? Well, it's very interesting. This industry is an offshoot of the power plant industry. And it's an offshoot that is intended not to clean up the trash problem, but to solve a serious economic problem in the power plant industry. You look at the people who build the plants. Typical example, combustion engineering, Westinghouse. Even Ogden Martin started as a power company in Germany. And you remember that beginning with the fiascos of nuclear power plants and the overbuilding of plants generally, what has happened in the power industry is that they have lost business. There hasn't been a new nuclear power plant ordered in the last 11 years. And Westinghouse said openly that they had thought through a way of saving the capital investment that they had in this power plant development, which was getting no orders, and decided that the way to do it was to go into trash burning, into incineration. So that what you've got suddenly is this powerful industry descending on the communities and the states to sell them a bill of goods.
What you do is you have companies that see this as a gold mine. They just had an article a couple of weeks ago about Ogden Martin, one of the garbage incinerator firms, and all the profits that they're able to make. And that's what these companies are interested in. So it's in their interest to spend money to get these incinerators in place. And so if you take American Refuel, for example, that's building the incinerator here in Essex County, what they have done is they got Port Authority with all its influence and all its money aboard the project. They went out and they hired as law firms for them one of the most influential Republican law firms and one of the most influential Democratic law firms. Nothing illegal about going out and hiring law firms. But the fact is that I would contend that you're buying influence when you do that. By the people they're able to hire, they're able to buy influence. And when you're talking about a project that's going to cost close to $400 million to build, that's what you're talking about with this incinerator. There's a lot of profit being made. You're talking about millions a year to operate. There's a lot of profit to be made. They can afford to go out and I'm not saying anything illegal is going on. We're just talking about legal mechanisms in which you're able to then pressure to have your industry being put in place. And they've been able to do that throughout New Jersey. And for somebody sitting in county government, what they're proposing is a very simple approach. You give us your garbage, and we'll build this magic machine that takes care of it.
Why is there such a rush to burn garbage in New Jersey? Why, when we've all read about the greenhouse effect on this planet and the adverse effect on the ozone layer that additional incineration can cause? Why, when the experience of our neighbors in Warren County indicates that the toxic ash left afterward creates a worse problem of disposal and, more importantly, an additional financial burden to the higher disposal costs? Why, when we know that in the last 2 years, 60 of 150 incinerator projects around the nation of varying sizes have been killed, both by voters and by administrative edict? Why, when the cost implications not only of construction, but maintenance and constant monitoring have not been calculated as to their effect on taxes? Why, when we are destroying basic raw materials that take more energy to reproduce, to extract from the ground, and to manufacture for use by human beings again? Is it really true that the problem has already been studied enough and that we should get on with any action no matter what the consequences? Is it really true that the American populace is either too stupid or too unmotivated to learn how to recycle more? Listening to our government leaders, we are led to believe this. Or is it really that the tremendous stakes in a $5 billion construction project has created some powerful lobbying groups extremely hard to resist at the state level?
I assert these facts, that intensive recycling, that is recycling that goes after all the recyclables, can get rid of more of the trash than incineration. And what's left is largely plastic and is not as toxic as fly ash. And it is an improvement, a net improvement in the environment, and it's cheaper. And it keeps the money in town. It's better. I mean, you know, just from an ordinary, simple bureaucrat's point of view, with one exception. An incinerator system can be done by a minimal act on the part of the bureaucrat. All the bureaucrat has to do is sign a contract with a big company. Then you forget it. But if you want to do recycling, first place, you got to go to the people. You have to explain it to them. You have to make a list of what goes in which container. That's hard work. Then you're going to have to deal with different companies. The company that composts is not going to be the company that does the separation plant.
There is a war going on. There is a battle going on for your waste stream. If there is a solid waste crisis, if there is a conflict over solid waste and a crisis situation over what should be happening, the crisis is that there's not enough. There is not enough to satisfy these conflicting viewpoints. One point of view wants to have your waste stream as fuel, wants to burn your waste stream. Another point of view wants your waste stream, that same waste stream, and wants to extract from it the resources that are in there. This is the huge problem that cannot be understated, and I think it has been fairly well stated, but I like to emphasize that because really, ultimately, the conflict will be decided by all of us, because the conflict is ultimately a political battle. That's the important thing to remember here. That's why it's so important that you are actually here, that you're taking this time out of your daily lives, that you're not at home watching the tube tonight and listening to this, because really this decision does have to come to you. And I like to emphasize that because I do think that very often our officials don't like to emphasize that. Our officials are not all like Freeholder LaRose, who is welcoming your input and trying to bring information to you. A lot of them take a more haughty attitude that, well, this is a difficult question, it's very complicated. We've taken some years to look into it. It's really much more than you can understand. We've made our decision now. Don't get so emotional. Don't interfere in this process. If you haven't heard it already, you will. If you keep butting your nose in, you'll butt up against an official like that. You will hear that, and you've got to overcome that.
Mike. My real question, though, is, did anyone over here, has anyone seen an incinerator on stream that has met their air emission standards? And what happens when they don't?
Warren County is meeting its air emission standards. Wheelabrator, Peekskill, meeting its air emission standards. Baltimore, California are meeting their air emission standards. The notion that they are not is simply not true.
Excuse me, Dr. D'Aiso, correct me if I'm wrong. Is Big Bertha in a non-attainment area?
Okay, we don't want to get too far off of New Jersey, Morris County.
Something about Peekskill and Baltimore. I worked in those plants, and I sat at the control console day after day, unlike Dr. D'Aiso, who went through there on a VIP inspection tour. And I saw more than half the time we were in excess of our SO2. You should know that neither of those plants, both of those plants were allowed to be built disgracefully without even baghouse scrubber, which is a state-of-the-art acid gas removal technique. And largely thanks to your new boss, Chris Daggett, they were allowed to go through like that. The very first quarterly emissions report that was submitted for Westchester, because I went up to a point in helping to prepare it, was absolutely falsified. The continuous emission monitors were out of calibration from the beginning, from day one. All of the emission data showed itself over the acid gas permit limit.
Tom, would you add...
Wait, don't interrupt me. I didn't interrupt you. Don't interrupt me. Have a little courtesy, sir. What they did was they made a quote-unquote adjustment to the data. An adjustment to the data that just coincidentally made it look like that they were in full compliance. For all I know, they've done that ever since I left the shop. Point being that people like Mr. Daggett and Mr. D'Aiso are very understanding about this because they have a point to prove. They have an axe to grind. They've already proclaimed to the world that these things work and that they comply with their environmental permits. I was there. I was inside. I was there on the days when the government bureaucrats weren't there to see what really goes on day after day. They don't comply. They spit out acid.
Okay, Tom, but the question is the Warren incinerator emitting emissions? Whatever happened years ago...
Comments to focus on New Jersey's plants, Tom. You contrast Baltimore...
You were the one who brought up Baltimore Peekskill, Tom, not me.
How are we equipped here?
If they passed their test, how come you haven't given them an operating permit?
No.
There's a major problem with the DEP in that, and I said that in a paper I wrote on the subject, if they were willing to tell the truth, both in terms of what they really know and in terms of the other statements people are making, this whole situation will be different. But as was heard at Mount Olive just a month ago, when a citizen asked Mr. D'Aiso if the Warren County incinerator was within air quality limits, his answer was yes. And I suggested that he had no way of knowing that because they weren't doing air monitoring, so how could he make such a statement? And he referred to me as being a liar. It wasn't 1 month after that it was announced in the media that fines were being levied to the tune of $181,000 against the Warren County incinerator for air pollution violations. So why Mr. D'Aiso is willing to make these public statements that are so unfounded and so clearly are contradicted by the facts and by his own staff is a tragedy to me.
To tell you my perspective on things, I said I'm not an expert, and I've never, I'm sure Dr. D'Aiso and Dr. McGee have been to all sorts of scholarly conferences where the theory of mass burn and various other types of incineration are discussed in a quite scholarly manner, and papers are presented, and experts who will never live within 20 miles of one of these plants get together over cocktails and talk about it. I've never attended one of these conferences, I have to admit. I've never even listened to any of the papers that are given at any of these conferences. But what I have done is I worked for a number of years for the mass burn industry. I worked getting permits for these plants. I worked while they were being built. I practically lived in them when they were being started up. And I know, in fact, how they do operate. I don't know the theory of how they're supposed to operate. I'll leave that to the experts to talk about. But I know the reality of how they do operate. Now, reality is a funny thing, you know. It tends to make some people nervous, and I find that especially it makes experts nervous. Reality to an expert is like a mirror to a vampire, because the vampire can't see himself reflected in the mirror, but most of the time the experts can't see their theories reflected in the mirror of reality. It just doesn't show up. It shows up nice on paper and in numbers and in statistics, but it doesn't really show up in the real world. And I think our proponents of incineration here tonight must just be a little nervous about the reality of the Warren County incinerator, because in their theory, a beautiful theory, before it ever got started, Warren County was the best thing since sliced bread. This was going to be the showcase. This was going to, I think Dr. D'Aso even said so himself, this was going to prove to the state that this is the way to go. It was going to send all those hysterical housewives back to the shopping carts in ShopRite, get them off the streets and stop complaining about mass burning, because it was going to prove that this is a proven technology, an efficient technology, a state-of-the-art technology. And what have we got? Well, it looked good as long as it was an artist's conception on paper. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen, before when they go to sell, you'll see plenty of them here in Morris County. The public relations firms will crank them out real fast. The beautiful renderings of these plants. And if you would hold it up next to one that's in actual operation, you'd realize that these people in the mass burn industry have Tammy Faye Baker beat hands down. I mean, it's just no contest. But the thing is, what's the theory? The beautiful theory was, hey, these things are going to, not only are we going to get rid of the garbage, reduce its volume 90% or more, we're going to recover energy and all sorts of valuable materials, and that's going to allow us to reduce the cost of disposing of our waste. Reduce the cost to $98 a ton, going up to $135 a ton, that's reducing the cost. That's the reality. That's not the theory. Yeah.
The test was done at the Prince Edward Island incinerator, doing exactly what we suggested, measuring the dioxin and furans coming out of the furnace, and then measuring it in the fly ash and gas at the base of the incinerator, at the base of the stack. And sure enough, almost nothing came out of the furnace, and there was a lot at the base of the stack. In other words, it was being synthesized. Now, the important thing about that is that this changes the entire ecological significance of incineration. What it means is that a control put on the stack doesn't do you much good, because all that it does is reduce the amount coming out of the stack and increase the amount that's in the fly ash in the control device. In other words, what this shows is that an incinerator is a dioxin factory, in the same sense that a nuclear power plant is a factory for making radioactive waste. When you turn on a nuclear power plant, the world has more radioactivity in it than it had before, and as you know, we still don't know what to do with it. When you turn on an incinerator, the world has more dioxin in it than it had before, whether it comes out the stack or is in the fly ash. And so here is a device which is a pollution maker. That's all you can call it. It creates an environmental problem.
Once the chemical's generated in the incinerator, and the thought is that they're going to manufacture lots of dioxins. Chemicals don't like to stay concentrated. If you have a whole bunch of them, the chemical is going to want to disperse. There's very strong pressure on that chemical to dilute itself out. Once the chemical does that, you don't know exactly how the streaming away from the source of it's going to be. It doesn't just sort of equally go out in all directions from it. A lot of it can, go in one certain direction. You never know. You're not going to know, that until, some years down the line, you probably, you could back and sort of investigate and try to figure out, all right, start sampling the soil and try to find out where the, what direction the dioxin went off in. And certainly it doesn't seem to be the best idea to, have one food source near a place that has a chemical like that. We don't lose sight of the fact that regardless of everything else, they say that the amount of dioxin is going to be very low. We don't have to worry about it. The other side of that, there isn't really good agreement on what is the lowest level that's likely to be safe for us to be exposed to. That, there'll be lots of disagreements on that. Most chemicals will say parts per billion. Everybody figure, well, if it's below parts per billion, then you have no problem. With dioxin, right off the bat, people want to talk parts per trillion because it's so potent, and lots of people feel pretty insecure that there's actually any amount that's really safe to be exposed to. And then you're right about the issue of, once you bring up food and things like that, that even though chemicals may be in the water and the level that's in the water, who knows, maybe dangerous, maybe not dangerous, the amount in the fish will be entirely different. The fish can really accumulate. So there is a tendency for chemicals to accumulate to higher and higher concentrations, sort of up the food chain.
We don't want this hearing to go out and send the wrong message to the state of New Jersey or to the bonding community. I fully realize the impact that this bill may have on the bonds that are already out there and the ones that are going to be done. We cannot have a position of the state of New Jersey putting AAA bonds that may be going on these authorities right now and putting them into a speculative situation by having a moratorium. It's a serious issue. I don't want the press here to say that this Assembly committee is trying to ban resource recovery plants in this state. I want that clear. I want it understood. I want it up front. And we have all of the people that are involved, I think, under one roof now. We may not be able to hear all the testimony, but I certainly want to emphasize the wrong message should not go out to the people of the state of New Jersey. We cannot afford to completely abandon any method of garbage disposal in this state, resource recovery being one of them, and one of the major ones at this particular time. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to the sponsors of the bill, Assemblyman Rocco and Assemblyman Pasquale.
This state should stop, take a look at where it is, and take a look at the impact upon the people of the state of New Jersey. If we do nothing more than that, if this bill goes down in flames, which it well might do with the kind of pressure coming on the members of this committee, and the money behind the people that are opposed to this bill, if this bill does nothing more than draw attention to the fact that we must do something in this state to stop this intense reliance upon one form of disposing of our municipal solid waste, the incinerator. I think for that, the people of the state of New Jersey will never really know what you've done for them. Because I couldn't get to the DEP commissioners before as a ranking member of the leadership in the majority. I couldn't get people to go out and take a look at alternatives from DEP. Now, Chris Daggett, I have to admit, has been willing to meet with me and talk about it, and for that I thank Chris. And I think there may be a different perspective coming from the DEP. And I know the state is somewhere down the road.
I'm very proud to co-prime sponsor this bill with a member of the other side of the aisle, because I believe that this extends beyond politics, beyond borders, and into the very heartland of this state. And this issue is critical because we're not only talking about the financial fallout, we are talking about the very air that we breathe. And this is a consideration. Mr. Chairman, there's nothing I like better than a polite street fight on an issue. I was brought up to understand those kinds of things. But when I hear the demagoguing that's been going on in concern of this bill, then we have to take off the gloves, and I'm prepared to do that beginning today. Now, Mr. Chairman, when someone says that this bill, if implemented, if passed, if ever signed by the governor of this state, will cost the taxpayers of this state X amount of dollars. If I hear one person come up and say that from the industry, from the department, from any county, I'm going to ask the question and follow it up with, where were you when we were putting the transfer process together? Where were you when we were putting the process together for building incinerators that are going to cost us millions of dollars? Recycling saves more energy than mass burn incinerators produce, number one. Number two, the energy produced by mass burn incinerators is the most costly to produce itself. What if this legislature wanted to go to 50% recycling 5 minutes from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whoever will be here? It couldn't. If we continue on the road that we're continuing on right now, we will be building 19 or 20 incinerators that need to be fed. We're not even able to respond favorably when we look at each county in this state to the 25% mandate, which will go into effect only a short period of time from now. We're even sending signals out in certain counties, my own for instance, that recycling is a phase we're going through, like adolescence. And that what we should do is understand that in 4 or 5 years when these incinerators are online, that we won't need to recycle our goods. We have no study, none whatsoever, that indicates what the cumulative effect of all of these incinerators will be if put online tomorrow morning. You don't have that scientific report. I don't have that scientific report. And John, I don't think you have that scientific report. What will be the cumulative effect? The State Department of Development and its redevelopment plan speaks very specifically about the environmental hazards already existing in the air and on the land and in the sea in certain parts of this state. It warns us. It is the DEW, the distant early warning signal as to what's coming around the bend. We cannot rush into a situation if we think, if there's any possibility, if there is a microscopic doubt that what we are doing to ourselves may be expeditious and costly both on our lives and the quality of lives of our citizens and our taxpayers. This is serious business. The DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP doesn't know what the cumulative effect of these incinerators will be. And if they did, I'm sure they would have told us. I'm sure they would have determined by now. But we do not know. When we in Passaic County, and I sympathize with my county freeholders, I sympathize with them, because it was dumped in their lap like it was dumped in everyone's lap, with no real technical direction as to which way to go, with no discussions about regionalizations, with no encouragement about other alternatives to the process besides mass burn incineration, when recycling was simply an afterthought, an extracurricular activity at best. At best. I don't want my children to be committed to a policy that is dictated by a particular segment of industry. I am frightened of that proposal. I am not concerned about the mafia, Mr. Chairman. I am not concerned about, unduly concerned about, the mob in the trash industry, Mr. Chairman. That's for others to investigate. I'm concerned about our mob. I'm concerned about the shirt and ties who make decisions for people who don't find out about those decisions until after the bricks and the mortar and the edifice has been built, after transfer stations have been put into communities which would not have happened in my beloved county of Passaic, where they put 2 transfer stations in a city, in the 4th and the 5th, in the 4th wards of the city of Patterson. The people didn't know what was even going on until the 4th and the 5th and the 6 days after these monstrosities were built. And they were promised that at 6 o'clock they would shut down. And like everything else that were promised, there is no one there to protect those citizens. There's no public advocate there to protect those citizens. And to think in my own county that we would even consider building an incinerator of mass burn proportions next to a hospital and 2 schools is incredible. But no more incredible, Mr. Chairman, than building a transfer station on a floodplain in the city of Patterson. Mr. Chairman, there are a lot of things in this whole situation that smell.
Even ocean vapor.
We can check in on oil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I appreciate this opportunity to comment on this bill, which is of tremendous concern to the Department of Environmental Protection. This bill, which the department opposes, has many components. The first is a study of cumulative air, water supply, water pollution, and land use planning impacts of all resource recovery facilities to be sited in the state of New Jersey. Additionally, this bill would impose a moratorium on the permitting of any such facilities for a 1-year period. I would like to offer comments in 2 general categories. First, I would like to address the basic underlying assumption expressed in this bill that resource recovery facilities and mass burn incinerators are bad and pose a threat to public health and the environment. This is simply not true. Secondly, I would like to address how this moratorium would conflict with the goals established by this legislature and by the administration to make New Jersey self-sufficient in terms of garbage disposal by 1992. A bill which proposes a moratorium on facilities would put New Jersey at serious environmental risk of having no place to dispose of its garbage. I must challenge the assumption that that resource recovery facilities pose a threat to public health and the environment, and that in fact resource recovery technology is unproven and is of questionable value. Quite the contrary, the department remains convinced that this technology is environmentally sound, environmentally safe, and can be regulated in a manner that is fully consistent with similar industrial facilities. Far from believing that this technology is unproven, it is proven to be an effective means of solid waste disposal within the United States and many other parts of the world. The department's design requirements for resource recovery facilities state specifically that a proposed resource recovery facility cannot place a demand on existing physical utilities which exceeds the remaining use. This includes potable and non-potable water supplies, wastewater, stormwater collection and treatment systems, energy supply and transmission systems, transportation systems, or any other site-related infrastructure. In those cases where additional capacity is needed, it must be supplied through the establishment of new utility systems which will meet the additional demand generated by the construction and operation of this facility. This requirement is also supported by the environmental health impact statement, which must be conducted for each facility prior to approval of site design or construction. Cumulative air quality impact studies are already done as part of the air permit review process if the resource recovery facility has a significant overlapping effect on another facility, other major source, or other types of incinerators. The DEP is now requiring the inclusion of small existing incinerators in the cumulative impact assessments.
But let me go to the heart of some of these matters, and unlike some of my colleagues who think mass burn is the wrong idea. My comments are dealing with the economic impact. I am a businessman. I was a businessman. I retired. I'm also a university professor. I retired from that when I started the Institute. And let me make it very graphic. Austin, Texas canceled the plant after incineration started. It cost them $23 million. And they did it because two businessmen won elections and became city councils and switched the vote. Because when they looked at the economic analysis of the plant, they determined, with the assistance from data provided by my organization as well as many others, that they would save over a 20-year period at least $150 million if they were to use proven technologies. I also want to point out that key industrial firms that are vendors in the mass burn industry are now abandoning mass burn. You can talk to the people at Westinghouse. You can talk to the people at Wheelabrator. They are no longer pushing mass burn technology because their own power engineers and their own licensees in Europe have told them that they have to get away from mass burn. You could read this in the trade journals. You don't have to take my word for it. You could call the executives of these corporations. The key thing is that everyone seems to think that if you cancel mass burn, there's nowhere to put the garbage. I heard people say the garbage will build up in the street. That's probably true if you cancel mass burn and don't do anything else. But you also have to understand that when people in the state say we're doing source reduction, we're doing recycling, we're doing mass burn, etc., it's true in only the most technical sense of the words they are using. I calculated that you're going to have to pay no less than $2 trillion to pay for just the capital cost of mass burn alone in this state, no less the operating cost. I cannot give you operating costs because right now they're moving up at a 45-degree angle. If I wait till tomorrow, those costs will be higher on mass burn, including ash disposal. The point is that you have not made an investment in recycling. You have made an investment in recycling that is less than 1% of your total solid waste management budget. Now, technically, it's true you've done something on recycling. But let's face it, we have to talk about comparable investments. And you're talking about mass burn plants that will take 3 to 4 years to come online if there are no lawsuits, if there are no political pressures put on you gentlemen and ladies who are representing your local communities. It will take you, based on my calculations and based on what is going on in Seattle right now and other cities in New Jersey right now, it will take you 2 to 3 years to come online with the technology and the institutional changes to recycle 50% of your waste. 2 years it will take you to do that. So if you put your moratorium on and switch your investment, and I will tell you how to do it, it's written in our technical reports, I won't take your time, but it is a known science. And let me tell you something else about compatibility. I also heard today that if we recycle 50%, what are we going to do with the next 50%? The point of the matter is, if you think that you can build a mass burn plant and recycle 50% and put the other 50% in a mass burn plant, you are going to get a very rude awakening. Because once you recycle 50%, you have taken out 80% of the BTU value of the waste stream. And you will be trying real hard to squeeze a BTU out of a rotten tomato. Once you recycle and process, and then put it into a mass burn plant, what you have done is taken a sledgehammer to kill a fly. Because in the last 5 years, the development of boiler technology is so sophisticated that what you're doing is taking a mass burn boiler, which is the lowest common denominator of burning something. It's designed to burn the least of beneficial fuel. Literally every second you get a piece of banana, you get a piece of glass, you get a piece of metal. And the only way they could do that is to build a boiler that's basically the most inefficient way to get energy out of any fuel, no less garbage. So once you do your recycling and once you do your processing, if you feed the residue into a mass burn boiler, you are literally buying a sledgehammer to kill a fly. And the cost of the more efficient boilers are 1/3 the cost of the mass burn boilers. Their efficiency is 1/3 higher, and the pollution is 85 to 90% lower. using sophisticated, modern incineration units if you need them. I'm not convinced you are. I want to point out that it is not only carbon dioxide that is destroying the ozone and other layers, it's acid gases, hydrochloric acid, NOx. Rather, that is oxides of nitrogen and sulfur dioxide. There's no need to build any new incinerators. This state has enough existing coal-fired boilers to feed in processed waste if you have to do that. And I want to say one other thing. I'm a businessman. I quit running factories in Jersey and Brooklyn years ago because I felt I wanted to do something else with my life. I wanted to help improve, not the environment, because I'm not an environmentalist, but I grew up in Brooklyn, and I see what happened to Brooklyn when ghettos started forming, and when generation upon generation of low-income people and racial minorities are subjected to uncivilized conditions. And if you start to recycle, my expertise is to bring in plants, manufacturing plants, that take the old material, the plastic, including styrofoam, which is now recyclable, and other types of plastic, and metal, and compost, and so forth, and create jobs. And the way I do it is when I bring in a private investor who's done this before, I say to him, I'll help you build a plant in Philadelphia, I'll help you build a plant in Newark or Camden or wherever we need these things, if you give a piece of the action to the community groups. And I don't mean jobs, but the jobs are good because they're paying $8, $9, $10 an hour. But equity, ownership. And that's why your garbage problem is not an environmental problem, it's an economic problem. You have the raw material flow through your state, literally through your hands, because garbage doesn't become garbage unless people touch it first and put it someplace. And those raw materials are the salvation for New Jersey's ghettos, and God knows we need something to happen. And the capital investment that you folks are pouring out to burn garbage, if you would take 1/3 of it and invest it in materials processing and manufacturing, you would not only solve your garbage problem, you will start revitalizing your inner cities. And in fact, the book from my organization is coming out next month called Salvaging the Future, Waste-Based Manufacturing. And what we have done is taken glass and plastic and paper and organic material, etc., and showed at each step of the processing and manufacturing stage the level of jobs that are created, the level of economic profit, the level of taxes that are created. And this is why it's not good enough to recycle. It won't help you too much to recycle and ship your stuff to Japan, as is now happening. Why ship the jobs and the profits to Japan or Korea or Taiwan, wherever it's going? We need those here in New Jersey. And I know I'm quote-unquote a foreigner because I'm from Washington, D.C. I've lived there 20 years. But I probably have spent more time in New Jersey than many people in this room because I live in Brooklyn too, and I go back and forth, and I stop all the time in between. And I know what's happening in New Jersey. And I know what the tax base in Camden County is like. And I know what the tax base in Rahway is like and the other cities that are dying in this state. And I don't mean any offense, because I live in a city also in Washington, D.C. that's dying because of all the crap that's going on. And what I'm saying is there's a way out. And it's not a quick fix technology way out. It's not a big investment in a mass burn plant. It's a diversified investment over an array of technologies to bring in entrepreneurs and investors and technologists and to educate people. And I'll tell you something else, and this is the last point I'll make, although I could make many more. And that is that people think that we're going to have to wait a generation to get our young people to recycle. It's just not true. Washington, D.C. is a city-state that has mandatory seatbelts in cars. I'm sure New Jersey is too. I cannot get in my car and drive away if I don't put my seatbelt on if my kid is in that car. And if you get your kid a recycling program in daycare or first or second grade, that same phenomenon is going to take place immediately. When your kid sees you putting a bottle of plastic or glass in the garbage can, you're not going to be able to deal with it. You're going to start recycling.
What I wanted to do with this, just by way of illustration, was to note that collectively this material is garbage. Separately, individually, it consists of aluminum, plastic, glass, paper, tin, a strategic metal for which we have none in this country, at least very little, most of which we import, and putrescible materials that left in a natural state will decay and go back into the place where they came from, soil. On the open market, these used beverage containers of aluminum in good condition, baled, will get about $1,200 a ton. Depending on its color and its condition, these glass containers will get up to $60 a ton, $40 to $60 a ton, the going rate. The paper products, old corrugated containers, up to about $25 a ton. Newspaper, there's a present glut on the market. The value of this material has dropped. It's temporary. It was getting up to $25, $30, $40, $50 a ton. Right now, some communities are having to pay to have this taken away. Some communities don't get any money for it, but if it's taken away without any revenue, it's still a material that you don't have to pay to have burned or landfilled. Cardstock, computer cards and so forth, they'll get up to $145 a ton. And this stuff, referred to by paper dealers as CPO, computer printout paper, will get up to $100 a ton. Tin cans, they're not actually tin, they're tin-plated steel cans, but the tin coating can be removed. They'll get up to about $60 a ton. And the plastic materials, high-density polyethylene, up to about $100 a ton. And polyethylene terephthalate, or PET, will get up to about $200 a ton. Then these materials, wilted lettuce, apple cores, an old carrot, here's a piece of bread, garbage. But composted, that material would receive a price. We're seeing compost marketing taking place around the country. That material mixed with your leaves and grass and brush trimmings, yard waste, shredded, composted, will fetch some places $10 a ton up to $20, $30 a ton. If you take all this material, by the way, not recyclable. Light bulbs, not recyclable. Not recyclable, it's a waxy paper. But if you take it all and put it as we normally do, and at least what we're doing too often in New York, waxed paper, I'm in New York, by the way, not recyclable. Another waxy paper, sandwich wrapping, also not recyclable. If you mix all this material together, it's not recyclable, it turns out to be trash. And in a neighboring county, Warren County, presently their price is $98 per ton to burn it. We don't know if it's going to stay at that price. It may go up if the cost of the ash disposal goes up. But the point, ladies and gentlemen, is that when we mix the smelly with the non-smelly, everything is smelly. When we mix the hazardous with the non-hazardous, everything becomes hazardous. When we mix the recyclable with the non-recyclable, everything becomes non-recyclable. The point is, of course, don't mix it in the first place. And as is happening in New Jersey, we're seeing some of the recycling manifested, but 25%. We've seen some cases where recycling can achieve much higher separation rates. The real question is not necessarily finding some arbitrary percentage figure, but asking the question of all of the available technologies we have, of the various mix of technologies, what is the mix that presents the most logical technique by which we can solve this problem, our solid waste? But my main point is, let's see how much we can recycle first. After that, then maybe we'll address the other questions. We haven't really seen how much we really can recycle.
Until 1953, we had source separation of our food waste in St. Paul, and it was an ordinance. You put 3 plies of newsprint, and you strained your food waste, and you put it in the newsprint, and you roll it up, and you left it out once a week, and that was also a mandatory ordinance in Minneapolis until the late 40s as well. In fact, every major city in the United States had ordinances that required curbside collection and set out of organic materials.
Rudy Perpich wants a new industry in Minnesota, ladies and gentlemen. Composting can give it to us on a large, large scale with hundreds and hundreds of long-term jobs.
much bigger would you say this pile was when in the middle of the fall season?
Huge. We had a lot. As what you see now, this pile is approximately 150 feet long and 30 feet wide. The spring of the year, we had 5 of these piles the same size. And as time went on, with the watering and the shaping of the piles, they condensed into what you see now.
Composting is the biological process of degrading organic material and returning it to a topsoil. And one of the prerequisites, which is very present already in the yard waste, is the bacteria. And the bacteria actually do all of the work. They are like human beings in many ways in that they want moisture. They also want to have a good diet. They need carbohydrates like the leaves. They also need protein like the grass clippings. And they also need oxygen. The reason that we're turning here is that it assists in getting the oxygen into the piles so that there can be rapid decomposition of the material.
We handled over 3,000 tons of yard waste, and we have not taken up over 2 acres of land. And we're talking 6,700 houses we service.
I ask you to consider that politics, again, politics is your answer, because while we don't have the power of the big dollars that the New Jersey Alliance for Action or New Jersey Act or some of these other big groups that are conglomerates of construction companies and incinerator builders and utilities who are investing all these dollars to try and persuade you, the public, through slick public relations pieces that incineration, it's safe, it's now, it's us. The only thing you have to combat that is your vote. You have got to press for courageous leaders, leaders of the type that the DEP has called obstructionist, has said have all the spines of eclairs on hot summer sidewalks. Yes, the people who are willing to stand up and say, no, this is foolish. I don't care how much money is behind this project. It's stupid, and we know that there are better alternative ways of handling our waste stream, and that's the direction we're going to commit to. That's what we want to do. It starts with you folks. Thank you.
You know, we're an American democracy, right? Discuss it, deal with it. Warren County was so secretive for so long, it was disgusting. It was a public entity that you couldn't get any information from. At least you're out, you're open, we're dealing with it. Let the chips fall where they may.